When we imagine what it would be like to eat a meal in ancient Rome, we often think of enjoying an elaborate banquet in reclined luxury. But while this might have been common among the upper classes, it doesn't reflect the experiences of the vast majority of Rome's urban plebs. Instead, these individuals would hit up their local fast food joint for a dine-in or take-out experience with friends and family. We have some evidence of this from a variety of archaeological sites, the most exciting of which is the recent find at Pompeii, which shows the fantastically preserved remains of an ancient snack shop. In this video, we will seek to bring the Roman fast food experience to life by rebuilding these establishments, diving into their menus, and taking a seat with their customers. Along the way, we will also be joined by Max Miller from Tasting History, who can offer some valuable insight on the topic. So today, let's explore what it actually would have been like to experience the street food culture of ancient Rome. As we dive into the variety of food from the ancient world, also consider the huge diversity of units which exist in the factions from our sponsor, Rise of Kingdoms. Rise of Kingdoms is a free-to-play mobile strategy game that combines real-time strategy gameplay with awesome historical what-if matchups. Pick from 12 civilizations, each with their own unique bonuses, architecture, and units, led by legendary commanders such as Hannibal Barca and Scipio Africanus. To add yet more variety, the Vikings have just arrived on the battlefield, with Ragnar Lodbrok and Bjorn Ironside leading the warbands into the fray. You compete with players on a shared map to build cities, form alliances, explore new lands, and battle for control of the kingdom in real-time combat. Progress across the eras as you and your alliance rises to the top. You can support the channel by downloading Rise of Kingdoms. Click the link in the description below to claim the civilizational change prop worth $50 and massive in-game resources using the gift code ROKVikings. Also, don't forget to participate in the promotional contest with tons of cool prizes like the iPhone 12 Pro Max and more. Enjoy! We can begin by resetting our expectations of the home life for your average Roman. All too often, courses and books leave the false impression that Rome's residential areas were filled with copy-pasted versions of the standard Roman Domus. These were buildings whose floor plan provided most of what you'd expect from a home today. A main entrance, a living room, a storage area, a kitchen, a bathroom, a dining room, a study, and some bedrooms, all of which were set around a central atrium and garden. In reality though, most people would not have lived in such a place. Rather, they would have lived in the Roman version of an apartment building, known as an insula. These multi-storied dwellings filled the city, and are what allowed it to boast such a large population. But without any regulations on their construction, these insulae ended up providing only small, cheap, cramped spaces for their occupants. In such a setup, there was no room for fancy dining, let alone cooking. Thus, the vast crowds of apartment dwellers had to turn elsewhere for their meals. What developed was a massive food service industry made up of thousands of businesses spread across Rome. These fit into every nook and cranny of the city. For instance, public buildings like baths and markets often had storefronts built into them, while the first floors of apartments and even the fronts of wealthy houses had shop space that could be run by the owners or rented out to businesses. These stores and workshops, known collectively as Tabernae, provided all kinds of goods and services. You'd find metalworkers, woodworkers, potters, barbers, tailors, clothmakers, wine sellers, butchers, fishmongers, produce merchants, and many more professions. For the purposes of this video, we will be focused on the Tabernae, which specifically provided food and beverage services. For most of the day, these Tabernae would be open for business, bustling with activity. At closing time, they would be boarded up and locked down for the night. The shopkeepers might then walk home if they were renters, or head to the back of the building if they were owners. To give you a sense of just how common these were, archaeologists at Pompeii have identified some 200 bars, taverns, and shops where you could buy fast food. In total, it's estimated that about 40% of Pompeii's 12,000 citizens had a tabernae attached to their residence. So what did these shops look like on the inside? Well, we get our best evidence from the preserved remains of Ostia, Pompeii, and Herculaneum. Here, we find that the most common form of establishment was the snack bar known as the Popina. Its entrance was a large decorated doorway meant to draw in customers. Immediately facing the street would be an L-shaped counter. It stood around waist height and had a marble or stone top. This is where the customer would place their orders. As such, it had several key features. The primary one was the presence of holes, which gave access to inbuilt round amphorae, known as dolia, which might hold all manner of food or drink. These in turn were often heated by a small stove beneath the bar, while lids were present to cover them while not in use. The end effect was something similar to a modern shawarma shop. Another feature of this front bar was a small set of stepped shelves built along the wall. It would have been used to hold plates, cups, glasses, and amphorae for serving customers. Just behind the bar would have been a couple other useful service items. Often, you'd see a small oven for food preparation, a sink-like basin filled with water to clean dishes, a rack of amphorae for drinks or sauces, and raised wooden rails for hanging meat, vegetables, fruit, herbs, and cheese. Depending on the size of your popina, the store might end there, with the curtained doorways leading to the owner's residence. Larger establishments, though, might have some additional floor space, which could be filled with tables and chairs. So what would be on the menu at this sort of place? The answer would vary from shop to shop and meal to meal. Broadly speaking though, you could find almost anything your Roman appetite might desire. The store owners were keen to play into your growling stomach, and often decorated their stores with evocative paintings of the sorts of goods for sale. Examination of the sewers of Herculaneum revealed the extent of the Roman diet. Here are a few tables summarizing this, which you can pause to check out in detail. At the very low end of the menu would be dirt cheap items like porridge, nuts, beans, and boiled or roasted chickpeas. The equivalent of the dollar menu would have cost you little more than an as, Rome's tiny denomination coin made of bronze and later copper. The rich often looked down on the poor who ate from this menu, calling them derisively ikikaris emptor, or buyer of roasted chickpeas. At a tier slightly above this, you would start to open up your options. Paying a sestertius, or 2.5 asses, you could get porridge with flavorful additives like honey and spices, or real bread and pastries. You could also get all kinds of produce imported into the city or grown locally in the urban gardens. These would include hazelnuts, almonds, grapes, olives, dates, figs, cabbage, beets, apples, pears, and all manner of other fruits, vegetables, and legumes. A clever owner might even put the best of these in a bowl of water to appear even juicier for his customers. These might be eaten raw, boiled, pickled, or fried. Starting at this price, you could also start to get access to animal products. This might mean getting straight up cuts of meat like pork, mutton, beef, duck, hen, and fowl. Alternatively, you could also get other desired bits and pieces of the creature, like a goose liver and sow vulva, or byproducts like eggs and cheese. Seafood was also present, with things like sardines, anchovies, mackerel, cod, eels, squid, cuttlefish, mussels, oysters, urchins, crabs, and more. Each of these items may have been sold individually and garnished with a selection of sauces and spices, the most common seasonings being salt, garlic, pepper, and of course garum. However, it was quite common to see separate ingredients combined into fast food meals. For instance, at a slight premium, one could easily purchase stews, skewers, sausages, wraps, and sandwiches. Another important menu item would be the drink selection. Rather than soda, your go-to refreshment would have been wine. One of the cheapest forms was as posca. This involved mixing wine vinegar with water and some herbs. Another popular form of drink was the conditum. This involved mixing warmed wine and water with honey, pepper, and various aromatics. An as might get you a small bowl's worth of these beverages, while a couple more coins would get you a pitcher. If you had a sestertius or two to spend, the shopkeep would let you buy a bottle of one of his table wines. A few more coins, and you could start to entice them to bring out the good stuff. Ancient Romans had both red and white wines, which came from various regions around the empire. Just as today, each region had its reputation. To give you a sense of the pricing, here's an inscription we've actually found at Pompeii. It states, quote, "For 1 as, you can drink wine. For 2, you can drink the best. And for 4, you can drink Falernian." Now that we've laid out the options, we can move on to the dining experience. For starters, it must be said that the Romans usually had 2 to 3 meals a day. The first, the intaculum, occurred in the morning. It was quite light, typically consisting of bread dipped in wine or olive oil, and perhaps a few small bites of cheese and fruit. The second, prandium, occurred at noon. For the rich, it was just a light snack, meant to tide them over to dinner. However, for the poorer labor class, it was usually far more hefty. This is when you might get your bread, meat, nuts, vegetables, and fruit to replenish your energy. The final meal, cena, took place in the evening. For the upper classes, they would enjoy an elaborate, multi-course feast. The poor, however, didn't have that kind of money to spend, and thus might have had a relatively lighter cena or eaten nothing at all. The fast food restaurants would have provided food for these various meals based on the sort of clientele that they catered to. At this point, I want to pass you over briefly to our friend Max Miller from Tasting History, who can give some insight on what it would have been like to experience Roman cooking from both sides of the kitchen. Take it away.
The cuisine of ancient Rome is incredibly varied. However, there is one ingredient that appears in almost every single recipe that we have, and that is garum, or liquamen, which was fermented fish sauce. It gave the food a wonderful umami flavor as well as imparted sodium, similar to the way that Eastern fish sauces are used today. Other ingredients that you'll find all over the place are fresh herbs like lovage and parsley, as well as pepper. Black pepper was a big thing, at least amongst the wealthy, in many of their dishes. When it came to sweetening, honey was pretty much the only thing that you had. They had access to sugar, but they didn't use it for food, they used it as a medicine, which is how I like to use it. Now, if you had a lot of money, then there was one ingredient that you would definitely find. Probably not at a fast food joint, but on the tables of the wealthy, silphium, or asafoetida later on during the Empire when silphium had gone extinct, had to be in your dishes. It had a wonderful, supposedly, flavor. It's gone now, or at least we don't know what it is, but the flavor was supposed to be just absolutely wonderful. And if the replacement, which is asafoetida, has anything to say about it, then it's kind of like this wonderful garlic flavor once it's cooked. Because before it's cooked, it smells almost rancid. In fact, the word asafoetida means fetid gum. Now at these fast food joints, it probably would have been pretty easy to whip up most of the foods. They would have been things like meats and stew type dishes and, nothing too complex. Sometimes a lot of ingredients, but nothing too crazy. In the homes of the wealthy, which is where most of our recipes come from, well, that's a bit of a different story. Lots and lots of steps, lots of ingredients, and of course, some really weird ingredients like dormouse and flamingo and peacock. You're not going to find that many of those at the fast food restaurants. Now, I've found that to the modern palate, at least to the modern Max palate, most foods from ancient Rome are kind of weird. And it's because of that mixture of sweet and savory that you get by adding things like honey and garum together. It was a common thing, but it's definitely a little odd to our modern palate. That said, I've come across some foods that are like, this really hasn't changed. It's also worth noting that most of the recipes that we have from ancient Rome come from the houses of the wealthy. While a lot of archaeology has been done to show us kind of what the common man was eating, it's not the actual recipes, and so it's a little bit harder to really know what it would have tasted like. So you kind of got to take it all with a little grain of salt or a sip of garum.
Thanks for the insight, Max. Now, in terms of the actual dining experience, you'd start by forming a line in front of your place of choice. At peak hours, this could stretch around the block. While we don't have evidence to support this, it's possible that there may have been some sort of ancient chains of fast food restaurants. I've conjured up a few franchise ideas for when I finally get that time machine working. In any case, as you approached, you'd be treated to all manner of sights and smells that further worked up your appetite. Upon reaching the counter, you'd then place your order. The menu would be listed on the wall, made apparent by the food before you, or be described by the staff. Once you made your selection, you would pay up. Prices again might be listed or communicated to you. For some items, it was a fixed price, while for others you paid by weight. It seems that the coinage would go into a cash register of sorts behind the counter, which was usually just an empty pot. At the shop of Vetutius Placidus in Pompeii, archaeologists, for instance, have found around 680 sesterti, the likely earnings for the day. For the truly fast food shops, your food and drink would be ready almost immediately, scooped up from the amphora as you watched. For others, it might take a couple minutes of patience for the waiter to bring you your order. Meal in hand, you could then decide where to eat. Should you dine in or take out? Small shops only offered a bench or two, and otherwise might have had a few stools spilling out into the streets. These would fill up quickly. Larger shops probably had a room or two of tables where you'd be more likely to find a seat. Space was still at a premium, so you wouldn't expect to be reclining unless it was evening at one of the more high-end establishments. Should you choose to stay, you'd be in for a quite lively environment. People would be chatting and laughing, while music might play in the background. If you left, your food would often be carried out in a to-go bag. These would typically be made from cloth or random bits of paper. Marshall jokes that it was the fate of all bad poetry to end up as greasy food wrappers. This food might be taken all the way back home to the apartment, as evidenced by the remains we find in the latrines of these structures. More often than not though, takeout food would be consumed along the streets. After all, there was tons of room here where you could meet up with family and friends. As people relaxed, they also played games. We have evidence of such boards being scratched out into the stones of the streets. Such a scene would be quite reminiscent of the thriving street food culture found in places like India or Vietnam today. If you really wanted to make mealtime a social event, then you'd head over to the inns. These also serve food and drink, though not as much as the snack shops, but offered significantly more floor space. The wine flowed freely in these establishments, and they were often associated with all the vices that philosophers would criticize: drunkenness, rowdiness, prostitution, and filth. Gambling in particular was a major attraction, despite the fact that it was technically illegal on most days. As one might imagine, these places could quickly get rowdy. Notices, for instance, have been found in common rooms, with innkeepers impotently declaring that no violence was tolerated. Pretty please. It's no surprise that the elite derided these eateries for the common folk as greasy, sleazy establishments. There was definitively some class bias at work here. However, to some degree, they did have a point. At one inn, for instance, we find the following note scrawled by a customer. Quote, "We have pissed our beds. I admit, host, that we shouldn't have done it. But if you should ask us why, it's because there were no chamber pots." In addition, the food itself was likely quite questionable. There were none of the health codes, regulations, or inspections that we expect today. Admittedly, some emperors did actually try. Multiple laws, for instance, were passed throughout the 1st century AD to regulate foods and the quality thereof. These did things like banning the sale of rotten meat. Unfortunately, the laws themselves were toothless without proper enforcement and were widely ignored. Nonetheless, people continued patronizing the Tabernae and Popina, and anyone attempting to sanction them was met with open hostility. They were just a part of life. We hope you've enjoyed this episode on Roman fast food joints. I've absolutely loved digging into this aspect of daily life in the past, and can't wait to cover more episodes on the topic. Do you think you'd like to go to a Roman tabernae, given the choice? And what kinds of foods would you like to try? Leave your thoughts and comments below. Change history by taking the reins of your favorite historical faction in Rise of Kingdoms. Guide them to transform from a lone clan to a formidable power of the age. To get started and to support our channel, download Rise of Kingdoms by clicking the link in the description below. A huge thanks to the patrons for sponsoring this video, and to the researchers, writers, and artists who made this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these related videos. See you in the next one.